Usually on the channel, I like to cover the best team you could use for a particular game. But something I haven't covered in a while is the worst team that you could feasibly beat a game with. Well, a viewer of mine by the name of Corrosive Toxins actually tried to see if he could beat Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green with what he would consider to be the worst Pokemon for this region overall. Of course, I've done my own worst team in the past, but Corrosive really wanted to see if his team could beat the games too. So when making this team originally, he tried to beat the game without evolving any of the mons. However, towards the late game, he had to evolve them due to it being too difficult. While there will be some battles that are easier than others, overall, this team should be designed to, in theory, have the worst possible matchups into a variety of opponents, while also featuring mons you typically should avoid at all costs. So let's see how this team can even do, and if he's somehow won against the Kanto region remakes. Starting with our starter Pokemon, we're going to obviously pick Charmander here, as Charmander struggles immensely against most gyms. While it can get cheeky and use moves like Dragon Rage and Smokescreen, you're still in a downhill position against Brock, Misty, Blaine, and Giovanni, while also not matching up well into a majority of the Elite Four. That said though, Charmeleon will at least be a powerful ally against Erica, though not really any other battles in these games, as fire types are not that valuable in the Kanto region, as even our ice type Elite Four member has mostly water/ice Pokemon with the exception of Jinx. Charizard will end up having Dragonclaw from the Celadon department store, Fly, which you'll get in a house on Route 16, Steel Wing from the Safari Zone, and Flamethrower, which you can get at level 34 from Charmeleon. Charizard won't really handle much else in these games positively, but you could in theory at least have a handful of neutral matchups, such as some against Lance and Bruno's mons, as well as some of Agatha's team. Charizard is certainly a starter of all time, and thankfully, we at least get a solid showing from it in later iterations, such as the Kalos games. Funnily enough, Corrosive evolved Charmander in the Charmeleon against Misty, so it could take a hit against her Starmie in order to set up a smokescreen. Misty was a pain in the ass according to him. Anywho, going into our next mon, we'll be obtaining a Rattata that'll evolve into a Raticate, found on the first route of the games. Now, there is one use for Raticate in these games, and it's a fairly capable HM slave. You'll be teaching Raticate Strength from the Warden's House in Fuchsia, Cut from the SS Anne, Rock Smash, which you'll get from one island, and Super Fang, which is your only non-HM move. The fact that Raticate will be basically using mono-normal moves until nearly the end of the game means you'll struggle to take on most fights, but you'll at least have a fairly great utility mon. At least Strength is a genuinely good option offensively for Raticate, as it is a base 80 power stab move for you. But that's really the best you'll get from this, since by the time you get Rock Smash, it's more for clearing rocks than actually viable coverage, since we'll be getting a fighting type soon anyway for this team. Speaking of that, Primeape. While being a decent pick for this team, it's definitely one of the weaker Kanto fighting types. Thankfully though, it does make the early game actually playable with such a weak team, specifically when fighting Brock, while also taking on some of Lorelei's Pokemon like Lapras and Dugong when evolved as a Primeape. There are a lot of opponents this will struggle against though, such as Sabrina and Agatha, but your moveset of Aerial Ace, Rock Tomb, Screech, and Brick Break gives you a fighting chance at least. Rock Tomb you'll get once you beat Brock's gym with the Mankey, while Brick Break is obtained from the SS Ant, and Aerial Ace from Route 9. Screech you'll get at level 53 as a Primeape, and it helps at least with making sure you can viably deal damage as the game goes on, since while Primeape has respectable offensive stats, it's not as powerful as options like Machamp and Hitmonleer. That said though, the Primeape line for your really early game is probably going to be the reason this challenge can even continue. So thank you at least to the Mankeys on Route 22 for existing. It's a truly game-changing Pokemon for this run for sure. Heading over to Mount Moon, we'll be getting our Grass type. One of the worst grass types in all of Pokemon history, Paras. This Paras will be an important piece for beating Misty and another important Pokemon for HMs. We'll be teaching this Paras Dig, Flash, Spore, and Return as a means to make sure that we have a Mon for some decent utility with things like seeing in caves or escaping them easily. While you might be wondering why we're giving this Paras Return, it's actually the best move that it can get because its grass and bug stabs are just that awful. For Misty, I would recommend getting Bullet Seed in Mount Moon so that battle goes by a little bit smoother. After Misty though, I kind of have a hard time seeing where Paras is going to do well. So, Corrosive, if you're there, if you want to educate me, by all means, dude. I can imagine this thing was probably the worst one to use. Speaking of Mount Moon though, we have a cliche Pokemon that'll be used in order to beat this game. Everyone's favorite, Golbat. I know that Crobat exists, but you can't get it without your national dex in this gen, so you will have to rely on Golbat. Golbat is definitely one of the strongest mons on this team, as your typing benefits you quite a bit in the certain enemies, but the moveset leaves a lot to be desired, with Wing Attack, Confuse Ray, and Poison Fang being your best options through level up, with Shadow Ball at least being a TM you can get to patch up some of the weaknesses once you've reached the game corner. Golbat is still probably one of the better flying types in this gen due to its stats being well rounded, and it'll help give this team some much needed bulk. Golbat will fill in the matchups Parasect would be failing to cover due to a lack of stab, while also being good into Agatha with your Shadow Ball TM, and maybe even claiming a KO or two against one of Sabrina's Pokemon if you're lucky enough to survive an attack. For our final major player of this team, we'll be going a bit further into our journey to reach Route 4, to catch ourselves a Sandshrew. Now, if you're playing Fire Red, you'll need the trade for this encounter, or find some other ground type such as Geodude, Diglett, or Onix, as Sandshrew has no native encounters in that version. Sandshrew will help once you've reached a Sandslash against a few major fights, with your biggest one being Lieutenant Surge as a true electric immunity, while also having some fine matchups into enemies like Giovanni and Bruno. Your biggest benefit for Sandslash though will come in the form of beating Blaine, as we currently lack a strong option into him outside of, I guess, just using Charizard defensively into his fire types. As for our moveset, we'll be using Earthquake, which we get from beating Giovanni, Iron Tail from the game corner, and finally both Sand Attack and Slash, which we'll thankfully get from leveling up our Sandshrew. This will make Sandslash into probably one of the best Pokemon on this team if I had to be honest, due to the fact we'll actually have a decently high power stab move with no drawbacks to it. But at the same time, we'll have to remember it is a Sandshrew, and ground types have bad matchups in these games to Misty, Erica, and Lorelei. So that's Corrosive's rendition for the worst team to beat Fire Red and Leaf Green with. This team seems very difficult to overcome this gen with, but I think if you were to plan accordingly for each battle you'll face, you can probably beat these games with some quick thinking and maybe a bit of luck with your sand attacks. The fact that Corrosive also waited to evolve these mons also plays a big role in how these battles went. With that said though, I love to hear how this team works out for you guys, and Corrosive, if you're there, please commentate on this further. On the way, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more team content like this. Maybe I can cover the worst team for another game if you guys want to see more content like this soon, as there are plenty of other bad Pokemon we could use, and God knows some of these worst teams could use a remaster.